Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we are very fortunate. We have one of the most incredible women at the moment in Australia in politics who is helping shape our country's future. And her name is Janet Rice, and she is the Senator for Victoria and has been a passionate environmentalist and activist for over 30 years. Janet took her seat in the Senate in 2014 and works with her Australian Greens colleagues in Parliament to be a strong voice for people and our environment. Janet grew up in Melbourne's western suburbs and she lives in Footscray. She is a climate scientist by training. Janet began her working life campaigning to protect our forests. She was part of the 1983 Franklin Blockade alongside Bob Brown and Christine Milne. Within a decade, she was a founding member of the Victorian Greens. Janet subsequently led several community-based campaigns and was the first coordinator of Bicycle Network Victoria's Ride to Work program. These local successes paved the way for Janet to become a councillor and later mayor of the City of Maribyrnong, where she swapped the mayoral car in favour of a pedal power as part of her commitment to reduce pollution in Melbourne's inner west. Janet positioned Maribyrnong as an innovator in environmental policy with the adoption of a carbon neutral strategy. Under her leadership, residents enjoyed the benefits of improved cycling infrastructure and planning models that encourage walking and the use of public transport. Janet has also served as chair of the Metropolitan Transport Forum in Melbourne. I could read more, but I feel
think that's
that
enough, Ricky.
I think that's great to give everyone the idea that this is somebody who has a long life passion to environmental causes and somebody who's had training in this area, who has a passion that goes just beyond being in politics for the sake of being in politics. This is someone who's there to kind of really represent people. And today we're going to hear a little bit about who Janet Rice is and what she stands for in terms of her own values and why she chose the Greens, or did the Greens choose Janet, and how that does shape with voices. How does someone like Janet go about representing people in the community? Thank you and welcome, Janet Rice.
Lovely to be here with you, Ricky. It's, really looking forward to talking with you today.
Lovely. So maybe let's just have a snapshot first, Janet. High school, what were you like in high school?
Oh, I was pretty nerdy. Yeah, I was a good student.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I won a scholarship, so I went off to sort of local girls' school, Lowther Hall in Essendon, and enjoyed school. And in fact, it was that going to school in Essendon at a private girls' school and growing up in Altona was actually pretty important for realising the difference. I mean, there was I growing up in Altona, the petrochemical industry just down the road. My mother was actually quite active supporting new migrants to Australia and sort of going off to visit the migrant hostel, which was there in just between Altona and Williamstown. And so I had this awareness of people, not everybody having the same opportunities, and some people really having to struggle by growing up in what was then a big migrant community, sort of fairly working class suburb of Altona, and then going off to school in Essendon, where many of the girls I went to school with were very well off, and just recognising that inequality in society. But I was good at science, and then sort of having been encouraged to be good, given that I was good at science, I thought, I'll go off and do a science degree. So I did my science degree at Melbourne Uni, and that was the thing that sort of really politicised me. It was learning about climate science in second year, when I was 20, 1980 this was, so a very long time ago now, 41 years, but recognising this is a really, really serious issue that the world needs to be doing something about. And
tell me, what was it like for a female at that period of time in the early 1980s pursuing science as a career?
Oh, look, you know, most of my classes in maths and meteorology and physics that I was doing, there were very few women in them. But it meant that we as a small cohort of women did tend to stick together. And for me, I think, you know, one of the things about going to a girls' school and growing up with a very strong, you know, a mother who was very much encouraged us to do anything that we could do, lots of other strong women that I went to school with, that I knew that I could do anything I wanted to do. So I didn't let that, you know, the fact that it was dominated by men get in the way of what I was doing. And yeah, so I didn't actually have a sense of too much sexism. But I think that was partly because of my own self-confidence and you know, I was self-empowerment and said, yep, I can do these things, and just, you know, and didn't strike too many barriers. But I think it was probably helpful that, you know, I was a good student, so that I was able to succeed academically and continue to have that sort of self-confidence in my own abilities.
And what sort of led you to that area of politics?
Well, I mean, it was very much that sort of pivotal time at uni of learning about climate change, and that this was really important, you know, something that the world really needed to be taking serious action on. Seeing that it wasn't even a thing at that stage in the early 1980s. No one was talking about climate. No one was talking about sort of global heating, the greenhouse effect. It was very much sort of just this sort of fairly nerdy scientific endeavour. And there was that recognition of, but, you know, we need to be doing something, otherwise we're going to be in the severe crisis situation that we are now 40 years later. And again, going back to the, you know, that sense of empowerment that I could do something about it, it was also really important that at that same stage I was getting involved in environment activism, and particularly in the Franklin River Blockade. And that campaign was massive, involving, you know, hundreds of thousands of people across the country, and, you know, culminating in the blockade. But it was a huge political campaign over many years. But the important thing was that we won. And so there was at the same time sort of having these two things of, there's this really important issue that the world needs to be facing, plus this first-hand knowledge that if you actually work together with other people and, you know, mount a really clever, strategic, you know, well-organised campaign, you can win. And so that was pivotally important for me to recognise, okay, if you see a problem, well, then you can work together with other people and change it. So I finished my science degree. I actually enrolled for a master's, but decided that, no, I didn't really want to continue on. I wanted a bit of a break from studying. And so I deferred that and decided I really wanted to see if I could find some employment in the environment movement, which I then did for most of the next decade. And particularly, and even in the environment movement at that stage, I wanted to be working on climate and energy, but there weren't many jobs around there weren't climate campaigners being employed by the environment NGOs at that stage. So I ended up working on nature conservation issues, particularly forests, which of course then became an absolute passion to see, you know, to be trying to protect our magnificent forests that we have in eastern Victoria, in particular in Far East Gippsland, which we're still campaigning to protect. But, you know, put that aside, that's another whole, we could talk about forests another whole session. But so there, I was working on forests, lobbying the Labor Party, lobbying the Liberal Party, and basically we got a little bit with Labor. We managed to get some really important national parks in Far East Gippsland, the Errinundra National Park in particular. I will say, if you have not visited the Errinundra Plateau in Far East Gippsland, you should go. It's some of the most magnificent old forest in the world. And it survived, very fortunately, survived the 2019-20 bushfires. So it is still magnificent, huge old trees, absolutely superb. So we got some areas protected, but not all the areas that needed to be protected. And I basically got fed up with lobbying and being just sold up the river and being lied to. And there was a really important conversation that I had with a Labor backbencher at one stage who said, look, you know, we don't need to do what you want us to do, whether it's on forests or social justice or anything else, because the people who are concerned about those things, they're going to vote for us anyway. And it was this realisation that that was true, because there was nowhere else that their vote could go. And so then for me, it was then, okay, that is true, what can we do about this? And this was just at the stage when Bob Brown and Christine Milne had been elected to the Tasmanian Parliament and formed the Greens in Tasmania. And I thought, we need the Greens in Victoria. So, and so I then threw myself into being one of the founders of the Greens here in Victoria, and we founded the party in November 1992. So coming up for 30 years next year. And since then, the Greens have been my vehicle for change. I still absolutely support and know the importance of grassroots community campaigning, but I think, yep, we need that, and we need the voices in our parliaments and our councils to be the representative, to be the voice, to be the people that those people campaigning on the ground, doing that community activism, can rely upon to actually get the changes in the laws and our regulations that we need. Because basically, in order to get the fair and just and equitable and sustainable society that we need to change our laws. And unless you're actually going to chuck the whole political system out the window, which I don't think would be a good idea, I think a revolution probably wouldn't end us up with what we want. Well, then we've got to actually have members we've got to fix our democracy, make it better, but we need to have elected representatives who are voting for the right things. And that's basically what the Greens have, set up to do, to be there, to be in the parliament, to be a voice for sustainability, for social justice, for peace and non-violence, and for participatory democracy, and to know that people can rely upon us to be speaking out and advocating for for those ideals and values in the parliament.
And since the formation of the Victorian Greens in the 90s, have you seen any changes in communities' perceptions of the Greens in terms of what they do and the importance of, say, issues around local spaces and built-up environments?
Oh, absolutely. Because when we started the party in 1992, we had 17 members. And so it's been a long process of building the party and broadening out who we were. And when you had 17 members, at that very beginning and for the first few years, a lot of our active people, although we were all committed to social justice and for a fair go for people, a lot of the early members were people who had been active in the environment movement. And so we brought that environmental sustainability, future of us all in the world perspective to things. And as we have grown and our membership has broadened and our appeal has broadened, people actually recognise that, yes, we are concerned about the interconnected nature of a fair go and justice for everybody, and for everybody having equal rights and for equality, and everyone having the opportunity to live, fulfilling and meaningful lives. And that goes hand in hand with working for the protection of environments and the protection of all of the other life that we share this planet with. And in fact, you can't have one without the other. So whereas initially we were perceived as being just sort of, tree huggers and only concerned about the natural environment, there's been a much greater recognition as we've got into the parliaments and as we've got into councils and the things that we stand up for. People say, oh yeah, you are concerned about us. You are concerned about raising the rate of income support, for example, of job seeker to $80 a day, doubling that rate. Really concerned about justice and a fair go for people with disabilities, for people who are struggling with mental health issues. Certainly people of diverse sexualities and gender identities. All of those issues, they are all just as much part of our Greens agenda, and that's increasingly recognised.
And one thing that astounds me that in 2021, why is it that the media sometimes still puts out this notion that it's a two-party race? Why is that rhetoric still out there when in fact, you've been around for 30 years and most people know of the difference in terms of what the Greens are in terms of their philosophy and their the nuances in terms of all the different areas that they intersect and stand for. Why is it though that the media still has a kind of that binary lens when it comes
Because
to?
the media know that they can control the two old parties, basically, and it's the power of money and the power of vested interests in politics. And so the same people, there's been this dance between Labor and Liberal in the media, and we know that, the Murdoch media represents those people who have got influence and power and the vested interests, the people who are doing very well out of the exploitation of people and nature that's currently going on. They do not want to give the Greens a fair go at all. So we are going to be misrepresented in the media, constantly, certainly by the commercial media and even the ABC. They very much they're towing the line between. They see that they've got to keep sweet with alternative, with what they see as being the two parties of government, and very much are still in that old mindset of, oh well, we only have parties of government and everybody else is on the edges. Whereas for us as Greens, we know, and my realisation 30 years ago, that the only way we are going to get Labor to change and actually to live up to what they have in their values with their party is to actually start really challenging them at a political level, and to say, look, if you are not standing up for the rights of people, the rights of the environment, well then it is possible to elect somebody else who will. And essentially our power then of actually having representation in the Parliament. But it's a long journey for people to recognise that power that we can have. And the example, of course, that we had, which Labor actually goes out of their way to try and forget about, was when we had the alliance with the Gillard government in 2010, when Julia Gillard was elected as Prime Minister and Labor elected, they didn't have the numbers to form a majority government. They needed the support of the Greens and Independents, and so they entered into an alliance with us. And as part of that, we used our power of having, that representation. When Adam Bant was just elected to the House of Representatives, and they said, sure. And we said, sure, we will support you, Labor, to form government. We wanted to continue to have, we wanted to have a progressive government, and clearly, the Liberal Nationals weren't going to provide that. So we said, we'll support you to form government, but there is a price. And that price was getting a price on carbon. So it was when we had the price on carbon, it was setting up the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Australian Renewable Energy Authority. It was getting dental care for kids included in Medicare, setting up the Parliamentary Budget Office so that we could have a bit of transparency of, people's election promises, for example. All really important reforms, and that's what we got out of that alliance. Of course, Labor, and it was, in terms of the price on carbon, during that period of the Gillard government was the only time up until the pandemic now that our carbon emissions in Australia have fallen because of the power of having a price on carbon that was initiated then. So there is a lot of power in actually being there and having the balance of power in the lower house, and also, of course, having balance of power in the Senate. And one of the reasons, over the last 7 years when we've had Conservative, we've had the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government, we as Greens haven't had we share the balance of power in the Senate with other, the rest of the crossbench, other minor parties and independents. And in particular, in this term of government, you've got to get One Nation to agree to something for something to be passed through the Senate, which is, tragic. But we're looking potentially, after the next election, we're potentially going to pick up 3 more senators. We've only got 1 senator per state in Queensland, South Australia and New South Wales, and it's looking good that we're on track to elect a new senator in each of those, which means we will have 12 senators, a very strong possibility of having the balance of power in the Senate as well, which will be, a very powerful position to be in order to be able to be getting legislation through the Parliament and actually having that effective power in the Parliament in order to be, using that power to share that power with the community, share it with people. So that, and really, doing the advocacy for improving the loss of people who are really struggling and really doing it tough and not having their interests taken into account.
Mm.
under our current really, conservative government that is just doing the bidding of their vested interests rather than of the people who are struggling in the community.
Well, one of the areas that people have always asked me, and how I have conversations with, is the notion of how power is still in terms of clean energy. Can you maybe just give us a little bit of an understanding of what does it mean when we speak about clean energy, and why is that important, I guess, for yourself and your party?
Well, I mean, going back to my, I am one of I think the only member of the Australian Parliament who has a degree in climate science. And the science has, solidified and is absolutely, 100% certain of the real crisis that we're going to be in unless we drastically reduce our carbon pollution. And what the science is currently saying is that we are just going to be going off a cliff, and with completely unlivable, conditions, pretty much, unless we can slash our carbon pollution to at least by 3/4, so a 75% cut by 2030. And that is in only 9 years' time. The other parties are talking about zero carbon by 2050. It is too late. If we are leaving doing the majority of the work until 2050, we are going to be cactus. We are not going to be able to be growing our food in the areas that we're currently growing it. Where, the threat of bushfires, the threat of floods, sea level rise, the lot, deaths from heat stroke and heat exhaustion are going to be massive. And let alone, the refugee problem of people, right across the world who will no longer be able to live in the areas they're currently living in. We'll have, climate refugees being a massive problem. So it is a real existential crisis for the planet and for all life on the planet. We can do it though. The good news is that we've got the technology to be shifting to renewable energy that doesn't pollute the planet. And so, whether it's solar, wind, other forms, geothermal, tidal energy, there are many different types of renewable energy, and then storing that energy, we can shift our energy systems away from the polluting coal, gas and oil into renewable energy. And so it's pretty clear what needs to happen, and that's to stop the mining, the burning, the export of coal, gas and oil. And the world has got to acknowledge that and get out of coal, gas and oil as quickly as possible. Yeah. But the power of the coal and gas and oil companies on the old parties, is that they're saying, oh, well, just let us keep on doing it for a bit longer. We'll do our best. Maybe we'll get out of burning coal in 20 years' time. It's too late. And so that's not about good governance. It's not about looking after the safety of the community and being concerned about the safety and security of the community. That's about looking after the coal, gas and oil companies, and who make massive donations to both the Labor and the Liberal Party. And they are still not only are they being allowed to continue, they are being subsidised to continue. Hundreds of billions of dollars that every year being given to coal, gas and oil companies in all sorts of different ways, which Labor sign up to just as much as the Liberal Party do.
And that's sort of, I guess, one of the issues that I guess sometimes people forget or aren't aware, that there are those vested interests and those political alliances that have formed with these private enterprises that really shape then and direct policy. And one of the things that has interested me in the last 10 years has been the way new homes are being made, and this obsession that everyone seems to have with air conditioning, and building homes with all these, and I'm thinking, why must all these houses become bigger and bigger in terms of using all these resources? And why must everything be, and we're having problems with power, and there seems to be no solution in terms of no one in governance in that, say, the Labor or the Liberal has really taken initiative to kind of listen to scientists who've been advocating to say, well, why are we fixated on artificial cooling? Why aren't we looking for better planning? Architects have been designing years looking at countries that don't rely on that. So
exactly. And again, it's something, you know, in terms of good building design, that, you know, low energy use buildings, and we know how to do it. You know, there are cost effective new homes that are being built, you know, across the country, 10-star energy rating, that have got very little, they require very little energy to heat and to cool. They're absolutely lovely to live in, but we are not requiring those sorts of homes to be built. We are just, and again, because of the power of the property industry and the property developers, who basically just want to be able to churn out new homes the way that they've always done, as and to make the cost of that new home appear to be, you know, cheap for people to buy, without taking into account what the long-term costs are of the massive energy bills that people then need to pay, you know, which are built into that house. But it's the property developers who have got massive influence over both Labor and Liberal as to why we don't have the regulations that we should have for really energy efficient house design. It's, you know, it's another really good example of the power of those vested interests working against the interests of not just our environment, but also people. Because people who, you know, if you're moving into a house, you want to be able to live in a house where you don't have to pay a lot on your energy bills. And we could be doing that, you know, and we could be making sure that our houses are really well insulated, that they've really got, you know, the right orientation, that they've, you know, good design. We should be insisting on that. But, you know, over 30 years on from when this has been talked about, those sorts of regulations still aren't in the design of houses. You've disappeared.
Here we go. Here we go. All back as we're talking about climate. This happens in the build of rain. And look, I think that's just an interesting thing too, Jada. This happens is that we become so reliant on technologies. And when things like this happen, you know, we kind of expect things to happen and be all the time and exists without disruption. And
now, can I break the just started to pour with rain here? I'm going to go and bring my washing off the line.
No worries. No worries. Interesting, isn't it? How what Janet has been sort of kind of giving us that sort of information about what is happening in terms of the environment, in terms of why is it that certain political associations that we have in society that have formed these partnerships, and when it becomes political donations become an issue. I just had a conversation with myself and the audience talking about this real complexity about political donations and the influence of governance when you have that, and that difficulty in transparency, which must be difficult when you're in your political career. You have seen this over and over again around you, I guess, that certain things
Absolutely.
matter. And it's like, and
Yeah.
you must be thinking sometimes, my God, why aren't people talking about this? And it just doesn't seem to get raised, or that issue becomes swept under the carpet. And
It's always seen as being too complex, and that, you know, oh, well, you can't get people to, you know, be too concerned about it because it's not people. It's more difficult to make the connection between people's everyday lives and their experience with that corruption that's going on. But I think that is changing, and certainly in terms of corruption and the need for a federal anti-corruption commission, for example, to be dealing with and to be reducing the impact of donations on politics. I think people are increasingly recognising that this is a big issue and that we need to be really addressing it. But it's hard yards, and again, you know, the people who are making the donations to the Labor and Liberal Party, and the Labor and Liberal Party who are accepting the donations, and the people who are, you know, part of the revolving door of jobs in the private sector, and they come into politics. You know, the number of former mining executives that we now have in the Senate is just astounding. And so it's just, you know, this circular door of people, they're not going to speak up about it. So it's left to voices like us. You know, we've had a legislation for a federal anti-corruption commission with teeth that went through the Senate. It got passed through the Senate almost 2 years ago now, and it's been sitting there in the House of Representatives. And yet we've had the government saying, oh yeah, we support a federal anti-corruption commission, and they've just been sitting on their hands and doing nothing about it for the last 2 years.
So what can you say to our young people watching at the moment and who want to enter a career in politics? Is it still the best place to?
Well, look, and I think it is. I mean, but it is the combination of having really powerful social movements and community movements, and then having powerful voices in the parliament as well. And I still remain hopeful, and in fact quite optimistic, that we can make our democracy work for us. Because even though we talk about the flaws in our democracy, at the end of the day, when people vote in Australia, they know that their vote's going to get counted, and that they know that the person with, you know, the most votes after preferences is actually going to win, compared with other corrupt systems where you have the election rigging and everything else. So we need to, and the power of, you know, voices like the Greens and progressive independents is actually making people realise that we can break through this really old, stale two-party system, and that we can have a government that is genuinely representative of the community, that genuinely listens to the voices of the community, that genuinely wants to be there to share power with the community. But it does require people realising that they can, realising their power, that they can use their power by working with those political forces and then getting people to vote the right way. and that's the challenge. And for us, you know, for Greens, we know that in the seats that we have, you know, a lot of support, the main way that we have worked in the past to be building that support is by having that real person to person. You go and have conversations with people. You cut through the sound bites. You cut through all of the, you know, election advertising that is just based on, you know, three-word slogans, and you actually have a genuine conversation with people. One of the things that we're really positive about the next election, I've got my cat on my lap here who is trying to jump up on my shoulder, is that we know that there are a lot of people, probably about an extra 20% of the community, who actually tell us that, yeah, we really like what you Greens have to say, but we think, yeah, we like your, you know, position on doubling the rate of New Start. We like your position on slashing our carbon pollution. You know, we like your position on getting corruption out of politics. But the reason they don't vote for us is that they think, oh, well, but, you know, you're not going to be a party of government, so what's the point? You know, why vote for the Greens? And in fact, they go off and they vote for the Labor Party because they buy the Labor Party line, which of course Labor use a lot of, oh, well, you know, what's the point of voting for the Greens because they're not going to be in government? And what we need to, our challenge is communicating with people to say, voting for the Greens, in fact, is really powerful. You get people elected, certainly in the Senate, you get people like me elected by voting Greens. And in the House of Representatives, it's only going to be a small number of people to change their vote, that we can do two things. One, we can get some more Greens elected, but in particular, we are probably the most likely outcome after the next election is Labor actually winning more seats than the Liberal Nationals. At the moment, you know, they are higher in the polls, and surely we have to get rid of this absolutely toxic government we've currently got. We've just got to kick them out. So I'm relatively confident that we may end up with Labor having more seats than the Liberal Nationals, but they probably won't have enough seats to form government in their own right. Because in order to do that, they've got to have a swing of about almost 4%. And the last time they had that level of swing was with Kevin Rudd in Kevin 07. And Anthony Albanese has not got the personal support that Kevin Rudd had in 2007. So the likely outcome is that you'll have Labor just, you know, having more seats than the Libs, but not having enough seats for government. And they're going to need the support of the Greens. They're going to need the support of the Progressive Independents, like in 2010. In which case, then the fact that people have voted Green is incredibly powerful, because then we're in a position to say, yeah, sure, we'll help you Labor Party to form government because we want to kick out the Conservatives for sure. But you've got to actually, you know, invest in people, invest in the environment, invest in equality, you know, in equality, not invest in inequality. Yes. And really, you know, be delivering the sort of society that works for everybody, not just for those vested interests. And so they'll be the sort of things that we will put on the table if we're in a position to actually, you know, then be negotiating with Labor to help them form government, like we did in 2010.
Janet Rice, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today, and hopefully people listening can actually, you know, for themselves check out the website. I guess that would be the best way, Janet, if people wanted to know more about the Greens, just to peruse through the website to see what the values and the platforms that you're positioning, and make up your own mind.
And look, send me an email, follow me on Facebook or Instagram and Twitter. I'm pretty active on all three of those, and it's a good, and in fact our Australian Greens page as well. And if you and basically signing up to our Australian Greens email lists, because we know that you're not going to hear about us through the mainstream media. We just know that's the case, because they are not going to give us the amount of time that they should. So we really rely upon having the channels of communication through our emails, through our social media with people. So sign up so that you get our messages, and then we can continue the conversation.
Thank you again. And once again, this is the space for voices to be heard. So, and we're very privileged to have Janet Rice speaking on behalf of the Greens, and also seeing what matters to her and of the importance of all the issues that she will take to the next election. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky.